Hey YouTube, welcome to Higher Math Solutions. In this video tutorial, we're going to talk about how to recreate the unit circle. This will involve knowing the angles, radians, cosine, sine, and tangent. So let's start with the angles first. On the positive x-axis, this is going to be an angle of 0 degrees, and then it'll go by either increments of 13 or 15 degrees. The next angle will be 30 degrees, and then it will go by 15, which will be 45, another 15, which will be 60, and then it will reach 30 degrees, which will add to be 90. And then you just keep going. Another 30 degrees will be 120, 15 degrees will be 135, another 15 degrees is 150, and then 30 degrees will make 180. Same pattern as before. 30 degrees will make 210. 15 degrees will make 225. 15 degrees will make 240. And then 30 degrees will make 270. Last quadrant. 30 degrees will make 300. 15 degrees will be 315, another 15 degrees will make 345, and then the last one will be 360. So that's how you determine the angles in each set. Now let's go over how to determine the radians. The radians will again start here at 0. And then the first one will be pi over 6, pi over 4, pi over 3, and then a pi over 2. And what's good about radians is that it's going to repeat these same numbers. So this again will be a pi over 3, a pi over 4, and a pi over 6. And then here will be a pi. And then again you will have a pi over 6, a pi over 4, a pi over 3, and then a 3 pi over 2. And then here will be a pi over 3, a pi over 4, a pi over 6, and then 2 pi. Now in the first quadrant, the numerator will be 1 pi. In the second quadrant, to determine what you add to the numerator, I always think of it like this. It's going to be one number less than the denominator. So since this denominator is a 3, I'm going to write a 2 on the top, since that 2 is 1 less than 3. This number is a 4, 1 less than 4 is 3. This number is a 6, 1 less than 6 is a 5. So that will complete your second quadrant numbers. Your third quadrant numbers is going to be 1 more than the denominator. So since this is a 6, this will become a 7. This is a 4, so this will be a 5. This is a 3, so this is a 4. So this is 1 more. And then in your last quadrant, what you do is you double the denominator and then subtract 1. So 3 doubled is 6, take away 1 from 6 is 5. 4 doubled is 8, 8 take away 1 is 7, and 6 doubled is 12, take away 1 is 11. So that is how you can determine your radians. Now let's look at our actual trig functions, sine and cosine. Cosine represents the x coordinate and sine represents your y coordinate. Since this is the unit circle, it has a radius of 1. So this point right here is the coordinate 1, 0. Cosine is your 1, sine is 0. This would be the coordinate 0, 1, since again it has a radius of 1. This angle at 180 would have the coordinates -1, 0, and this coordinate at the very bottom will have the coordinates 0, -1, and then it just repeats. Okay. Now let's look at how to determine them in between the axes. What I normally do is I always write both of my numbers over 2 as such, and then the only numbers that go on top are either 1, 2, or 3. So I start down here and I go 3, 2, 1, and then 3, 2, 1. And then I just take the square root of the top numbers. And I don't take the square root of 1 because the square root of 1 is 1. And what the good news is once you have the first quadrants filled out, the rest of them are just repeating. So on the second quadrant, again, I just write everything over 2. And it's going to be the same thing. So here I'm going to start with 3, 2, 1. And then over here, I'll go down as 3, 2, 1. And then you just take the square root of all your top numbers. The only difference in the second quadrant is that you're going to make one of them negative. Since you're in the second quadrant, your x-coordinate is now negative and your y-coordinate stays positive. So I'm just going to put a negative sign in front of all my x-coordinates. Again, this represents cosine and my y-coordinates represent sine. And then I'm just going to repeat myself again. All of the numbers are over 2. And then my x-coordinates, I'm going to start with 3. So it goes 3, 2, 1, and then 3, 2, 1. And then you take the square root of all the top numbers. But in the third quadrant, your x and y are now negative. So I'm going to make both of my numbers negative in the third quadrant. Again, the x-coordinate represents cosine, and the y-coordinate represents your sine. And now I just have one more quadrant left. Again, they're all over 2. Cosine, I'm going to start with 3, and then go 2, 1. Sine, 3, 2, 1. And then take the square root of the numerators. And in the fourth quadrant, my x-coordinate is positive, and my y-coordinate is negative. So that means all my y-coordinates, or my sine, will be negative numbers. And that is a good way to remember cosine and sine. Now I wanted to go ahead and go over one more, which will be our tangent. Tangent is actually the slope of your lines. So the x-axis is a horizontal line, which means it has a slope of 0. So I know my tangent at 0 and 180 will be 0 because slope of a horizontal line is 0. Slope of a vertical line is undefined. So I know that tangent at my 90 degrees is going to be an undefined value, and also at 270 degrees, tangent will also be undefined. Now I'm going to look at the in-between of the axes. A way that helps me remember tangent is knowing my radians. I know it's either going to be 1 or have including a square root of 3. Since this is a 6, I remember that it's square root of 3 over 3 because 3 plus 3 equals to 6, and that helps me remember. At the 45-degree angles, since sine and cosine are the same, my slope would be 1. And then at the top angle, at pi over 3, since you only have 1 3 in the denominator, you only have 1 3 in your number. And then it just repeats itself. So again, on this side, I know this is a pi over 3, which means I only have 1 3. This one is the 45, which means both numbers are the same, so this will be 1. And this is a pi over 6, which means I have 2 3's because, again, 3 and 3 make 6. But don't forget to include your negatives. On the second quadrant, tangent will be negative, and so you need to add that negative number in. In the third quadrant, it's again the same repetition of numbers. So this is a pi over 6, so that means I have 2 3's. This is a pi over 4, which means it's a 1. This is a pi over 3, which means it's just 1 3. In the third quadrant, tangent will actually be positive because your x and y coordinates are both negative. And then your last quadrant, same numbers. Pi over 6, there's 2 3's, so square root of 3 over 3. Pi over 4 is a 1. Pi over 3 is just 1 3. And then in the fourth quadrant, my tangent will be negative. A good way to remember which ones are positive and negative is to remember a saying called all students take calculus. And for the first quadrant, all represents A, which means all of them are positive. In the second quadrant, S for students represents sine is the only positive. In the third quadrant, tangent is the only one that's positive. That's for take. And then the last quadrant, calculus, C is for cosine, which means cosine is the only one that is positive. Thank you for watching Higher Math Solutions. I hope these videos are helpful, and please subscribe. Please tell a friend, and I will see you next week.